Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Blue Monday special where we'll be discussing a latest book release by the author Karl Fuller. Welcome to the Blue Monday podcast.
Hello, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will know you from your East Anglian and Ipswich Town column, The Fuller Flavour, which must be, 10, 12 years
old
now, is it?
Past 12 years in September, yeah.
Yeah, so you've had some good things to write about the last few years, but I did sometimes wonder how you survived the first few, like we did on the podcast. It was almost a bit like, what are we going to find to talk about? And for you, what are you going to find to write about? But I'm sure you found it easier in recent seasons.
It's funny you should say that because it started to get hard again last season. I think when you've got the same old thing to talk about, so last year it was great result after great result each week. It became hard again, but in a very nice way. Obviously, I had to go through the Paul Hurst, Paul Lambert years, and it was just deja vu every week. I felt like I could almost write the same column from a year before, but just change the names and nobody would notice.
That is what we had to do for some of our podcasts, to be fair, and no one did seem to notice that we were just recycling the same old stuff. But I better not tell anyone our trade secrets on that.
Of course.
So just quickly, this is your fourth Ipswich Town book that you've written over the last, 3 years, is it now? So you're firing them out quite quickly.
Yeah, it's actually 2 years. Town on the Telly, the first book, was published and released on the 1st of September. Well done. I thought that was 3 years ago, and I couldn't believe it when I looked yesterday and saw it was September 22. So, 4 Ipswich books in 2 years. And on top of that, 2 FC Clacton books as well.
Okay, yeah, because obviously you've written a few books about FC Clacton and Clacton Town over the years before this as well. So you sort of honed your craft in the non-leagues before stepping up into the Football League and the Premier League.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, started at grassroots level.
So I'll just to quickly run through your book. So your first one, Town on the Telly, I've read this one, and this is, as it sounds, it's all the TV matches that Ipswich played over the years. Obviously, it started from sort of less frequent TV matches that we used to have back in the day, sort of maybe the FA Cup final and through there until probably the last couple of seasons where we're having 20-odd Sky matches a year, and it's no longer a novelty to see TV games. There's packed full of stats, as you'd expect. Who's played the most appearances on TV, most goals, red cards on the TV. And then, is there anything you want to say about that one quickly? Or
yeah, you're right. I mean, when you think our first full live game was the Cup final in '78, and then the next one was the Manchester United FA Cup game. I can't even remember off the top of my head when that was. Was that about 84, 85 time? 86. So there was a huge gap. And then when the book was published, I think the last live game that went up to was Rotherham. And we've probably had in the region of about 30, 40 live games since then in 2 years. So it's well out of date already.
Yeah,
I'll have to work on a second edition.
Yeah, it was January 1988, our second game. And then our third one was February 92. And then we had 2 in a week. And then it was the Premier League. So yeah, things moved on quickly from there. And then your next one is the Game Changers, the story of the 2022-23 promotion season. And then you followed that up with a Game Changers Premier Edition covering the 23-24 season as well. So,
yeah, I never thought I'd get to the Premier Edition one. The idea behind the first Game Changers book was really just to bring all my columns from the season together to celebrate promotion from League One to the Championship, and then just have everything in the back, the lineups, the league table scores, everything like that. And I just thought it would make a nice sort of singular place to have the season summarised. And then, of course, when we got promoted from the Championship, it was a case of, well, I should do that all again, really, because it just follows suit naturally. And I actually did that as the season went along. The first one I had to write fairly quickly as the season finished, but I thought last season I'll do it as I go along, and then it'll just be there at the end of the season. And it could have come out probably 3 days after the Huddersfield game, but then we had the worry about what was happening with Kieran McKenna, and that delayed publication until about the beginning of June.
Okay. And now your fourth book, which is the one we're here to talk about tonight, aptly for this international break that we're in, it is For Town and Country, a book detailing the 12 Ipswich players who have played for England. And I'm right in saying I haven't managed to read the book yet, but it goes through each game that these players were involved in, from Ray Crawford back in 1962 to Richard Wright in 2000.
Yeah, so it follows a very similar theme actually to the Game Changer books. Well, even Town on the Telly as well. You'll have all the lineups from every game that featured an Ipswich player in the back end of the book. So there was 108 games that featured an Ipswich player, and yeah, it kind of starts off with Ray Crawford playing for England, how that came about, and then just goes through chronologically through the players, the matches, right through to when Richard Wright played.
And are there so basically, if we run through the players in there, is there anything that stands out on each player? If we just flick through each of the 12, something that I don't know, just a little tidbit on each of those which you'd sort of like to share?
Okay. So I think right through from Ray Crawford through to those guys that debuted sort of in the early 80s, there was a common theme, and it did make me wonder a little bit about how Phil Foden struggles playing for England at times, because Ray Crawford told me he was the first one I interviewed for the book, but I had interviewed Kevin Beattie many years ago for Those Were the Days and one or two other publications. Unfortunately, I still got those interviews on tape, so I was able to refer back to when we talked about his England career. But what Ray Crawford said on his debut that he just had to play like he did for Ipswich. Walter Winterbottom was the manager and said, just go out and play like you do for Ipswich. But Ray said, I couldn't, because it was a completely different system. And on his debut, he actually played out on the wing and crossed for Bobby Charlton to score. And Sir Alf Ramsey picked him up after the game and wasn't very sort of happy with what happened. He said that should have been you in the centre for Bobby to cross and score to. But also, Ray only found out that he was playing or being called up to the England squad because of another Ipswich player shouting across the street, "Congratulations, Ray!" And Ray had no idea why he was called up or what the congratulations was all about.
Yeah, because he'd also previously played for Malaya as well in the mid '50s when he was at their national service. That he'd had a game for their national team and had been called up for an Asian Cup qualifier as well. But
yeah, he
didn't follow that through. So there, and then the second England international was Mick Mills, obviously one of our, I think other than Terry Butchie, is the guy that got the most caps for England whilst in an Ipswich shirt. And
yeah, so Mick played 42 games for England. All of those games came whilst as an Ipswich Town player, which was 3 less than Terry Butcher's record of 45. Terry actually played 77 games. A little reason why I wrote this book, which perhaps we'll come on to in a moment, is really to do with the 82 World Cup. And obviously Mick was our captain at the World Cup for all 5 games that were played. And my sons are in their 30s now, and they still can't believe it when I sit there and bore them to death about Ipswich having 3 players at the 1982 World Cup. 1 scored, one was captain, and only Manchester United were the only other team that had 3 players in the starting lineup. So it's an amazing feat, really, and one that's almost scarcely believable now.
Yeah, and also there was 3 players in the Scotland squad as well, and Johnny Walk scored in that World Cup as well. So
yeah,
sort of when squads were a lot smaller, there to have had 6 players at the World Cup is unbelievable, really. And
yeah, it is
especially unbelievable to anyone who's talking about Ipswich Town in like current terms.
Yeah, and also just going back to perhaps a few years before that in the 70s, when I was putting the book together and writing in the lineups, I include the clubs that players came from on the England lineups. And it wasn't just Ipswich, it would be Derby, West Brom, Brighton. There'd be all sorts of clubs, really, that players came from. It was just unbelievable, really.
There's a lot fewer internationals back in those days as well, well, Europe wasn't 53 countries for a start, so there wasn't a huge amount of European qualifiers there, and major tournaments were much smaller, 16-team World Cups, where it's going to be 48 for the next one as well. So
yeah,
it really
exactly.
was the cream of the crop going away there. And then we've already mentioned him earlier, but Kevin Beattie, obviously someone you knew well when he was alive, the late, great Kevin Beattie, but only 9 caps for England for Kevin, where he's someone who maybe should have got a lot more than that.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. He's often cited as Ipswich's greatest ever player, and Should have just played many more games, and I think even some of those 9 he shouldn't have played because he got through with injections like he did when he played for Town. I think Kevin's most memorable game for England would have been a 5-1 win over Scotland at Wembley. He scored in that game, as did another Town player in David Johnson. It's just a shame that Kevin didn't go on and play so many more games. Another guy that I've interviewed in the book is Joe Corrigan, actually, the Manchester City goalkeeper. He talks about playing with some of those Ipswich players for England. He also talks about what Ipswich were like as a team and the players he played against, especially in the 81 FA Cup semi-final. And it was quite a coincidence in the end that Joe also only played 9 games as well, but obviously he had Peter Shilton and Ray Clements to fight for one spot.
Yeah, and I say you just can't believe that how sort of few caps he got as a Ipswich player, and sort of also when you look at the list, you've also got sort of Colin Viljoen, 2 caps for England. David Johnson earned 3 caps when he was at Ipswich, but did he win more when he was at Liverpool?
He won 5 more at Liverpool.
5 more at Liverpool, but again, it's still not large numbers of caps. Brian Talbot 5 caps at Ipswich, but I guess he won more when he was at Arsenal.
Only one more, and that was
more.
Yeah, that was a good couple of years after he left Ipswich.
And then we're sort of skipping over here. Trevor Wymart, who sadly passed away recently. We spoke about him on the Blue Monday podcast, and there was a preview that Dave did, and I think he had 1 cap, which was a game against Luxembourg, 20-odd minutes off the bench. And when you look to see eras where caps have been, not so much under Gareth Southgate for England, but in sort of under previous managers where caps are sort of handed out like confetti to players, and you see how much it means. Like I've got Ray Crawford's book here, and he's still talking about his 2 England caps. There's pictures of him there. There's a picture of him in the book still wearing his England caps and how proud he was to have made the 2 appearances that he did. And it's such a shame that these fantastic players were not able to maybe win the amount of caps they deserve for one reason or another back in the sort of 70s and 80s.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, part of the Trevor Wymart story this week and the remembrance was his goals against West Brom when Town beat them 7-1. And you look at some of those goals and you think how destructive he was and how he didn't play more games for England.
No, and then I've sort of missed one out here. Paul Mariner, 33 caps as a Ipswich player and more as a Arsenal player.
Two more.
2 more, yeah, not a couple more. But again, he's a player that went to the 82 World Cup, we scored such an important goal in the qualifier to get us there, and then scored against, is it Spain or France he scores against in the start of the World Cup, and is the striker for England going into that World Cup.
He was, yeah. The first England game I really recall was when we beat Hungary 1-0 and Paul Mariner scored, actually. As you alluded to earlier, the games weren't really live so much back in the day. You relied on, and I refer to this in the book, you had to rely on highlights on Sports Night or Midweek Sports Special. And I'm sure the England-Hungary game was live, if I remember rightly. I could be wrong. I was only 10. And Mariner was almost falling over in the 6-yard box when he managed to just stick a foot out and the ball went in. We won 1-0 and qualified for the World Cup, when for much of that qualifying campaign, it looked like we wasn't going to. But just to go back on the caps figures, these 12 players played a total of 197 games for England. 156 of those were whilst at Ipswich. So you think only 41 were won whilst not at Ipswich. When you consider 32 of those were Terry Butcher's caps that he won whilst a Rangers player, it just goes to show how all these players that played for England whilst at Ipswich didn't really, again, like we said, Brian Talbot, 1 cap, a couple of others, 2 caps. So it really showed what they did at Ipswich to really make the international stage.
Especially when you look at David Johnson and Brian Talbot, for example, their players have gone on and had fantastic careers after they've left Ipswich and won trophies and trophies at Arsenal and Liverpool respectively, and you just think, how were they not able to then find their way? Normally nowadays, if you're an Ipswich player who's got 2 or 3 England caps and you go to Manchester United or Arsenal or Man City, you're going to get 50 more caps if you go.
Yeah.
Just by being a first team player at one of those clubs, you're of a level where you're going to be there. But obviously back then there was a lot more English players in the first division. It was sort of nearly all British players at the time in the first division, and I guess managers had, like all managers do, had their favourites, have the players that they trust, the ones that they want to play in their positions. Probably what Kevin Beattie suffered with while he was playing at left back, because was it like Colin Todd playing in the centre of defence there, where every Ipswich player would tell you he's a better defender than him, but the manager obviously liked him at the time. And you just, there isn't the sort of constant camps where you can go there to prove your point. The squads are being called up; they're much smaller squads, and at the time there wasn't international breaks. You played for your club on the Saturday and go away on the Monday, play for your country on the Wednesday, and come back and play for your club the following Saturday. So there wasn't really the opportunity to impress, was there?
No, there wasn't. And I also got the feeling from one or two of the players I interviewed towards certainly after the Bobby Robson era of becoming England manager, that we didn't see so many or as many as 3 Ipswich players playing for England, because there was that fear of picking old favourites and, too many players from Robson's sort of ex-club side, if you like.
Blue Monday is proudly brought to you in partnership with our friends at Atwell Solicitors, your ideal legal partner for work on property or business law. Their client care has repeatedly been recognised as outstanding, and they are people-focused with a plain English approach which sets them apart. They have offices in Ipswich, Colchester and London, and to find out more, head to atwells.com.
And obviously Eric Gates is another guy I've not mentioned, who just picked up a couple of caps in 1980. But funny you should mention that, because obviously Alf Ramsey goes to become the England manager in 1963 and never calls up an Ipswich player until Mick Mills in sort of 1972. He's the first Ipswich player that he's called up in that time. I know by that point we dropped down the leagues, but you think someone like Ray Crawford, maybe we've had a chance, but I guess at this stage Jimmy Greaves is just the absolute man, so there's no room for him there. But when Bobby Robson comes in, Mick Mills doesn't get another cap under Robson, I don't think. Terry Butcher's obviously the guy that stays in the team, but Russell Osman plays a couple more. Eric Gates never gets another call up, and obviously the Y marks. Mariner plays a few times under Robson, but again his career ends relatively quickly once Robson's in charge. So it does feel like you say, he's almost tried to step away from his Ipswich players and sort of move on from there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, by the time we got to the '86 World Cup, it was literally Terry Butcher was the only player. Obviously, by then a lot of the greats like Paul Mariner, Russell Osman had left Ipswich anyway. But it just. Going quickly back to Ray Crawford and that era, and I know it was just before Alf Ramsey, sorry. Ray could not believe that Ted Phillips never got called up. You think he scored, 42 goals in one season?
Well, when we won the title, they scored 61 goals between them in that season, didn't they?
Yeah, and Ray just couldn't believe how he got an England cap or two, and Ted Phillips never did. But as you said, Jimmy Greaves then came on the scene. And back in them days, you had sort of 3rd division players playing for England as well. I think it was the second game of Ray Crawford, his second cap, played alongside a Crystal Palace player who were in the 3rd division then. And
the team was picked by committee in those days as well, wasn't there? And no doubt there was people on the FA board who wanted players from their clubs put in there. I don't think they were watching players. I think there's quite a famous story about a Plymouth player who was selected in the squad, but he was a mixed race or a black player. And the selectors didn't even know he was mixed race or black. And when they found out, I think he got injured. But it was like, okay, well, what on earth have we done that? We didn't want him in the squad for sort of racist reasons back in the day. And it's like that was how people were getting called up there. They were someone from the local FA was recommending people and trying to make it work from there.
Ray said actually when Alf Ramsey first became England manager, he was given a list by the committee of players to select. And he politely said, "Thank you very much for your time in supplying this list." And he ripped it up. He said, "I'm the manager now, and I'll pick who I want."
Yeah, and it hasn't changed since then. So interesting there. And then obviously we've got Terry Butcher, who's probably Ipswich's best ever England player. I think you could argue another player that captained another Ipswich player who captained England at a World Cup in the 1990 World Cup. He was a captain through that, but obviously at that time he was a Rangers player, not an Ipswich one. And there's the famous photo of Butcher with his head bandaged in the, I think, 1987 or 88 in an away game to Sweden. But
yeah,
again, not at the club. And it's been sort of slim pickings really since Terry Butcher's left in 1986, with only Richard Wright was the only player of the sort of modern era, and that's Stephen pushing to say the modern era now, to play for England against Malta away, and sort of shortly after the playoff final in 2000.
Yeah, there's a brilliant story. I won't really reveal too much because Richard was, again, one of the players that I interviewed, and that sort of moment and time in his life where he got promoted with Ipswich by winning the playoff final, and then it was during the week after pretty much that he then went on international duty, but in between he got married as well. And it was just a crazy time. And he told me that, I can't really remember this, but he said it was only him and Tony Mowbray not on the bus for the celebrations after the playoff final. He said Tony Mowbray was away doing his coaching badges, and Richard Wright had obviously gone off onto international duty.
Yeah, and crazy. And a few weeks after that, he was part of the England squad at Euro 2000 as well. And I think there was one game David Seaman was injured, so he was actually I think he was on the bench for all 3 games, as the whole squad was, but he was the backup keeper for that. I've actually got this is his match-prepared shirt from the Euros that I've bought it and auctioned before.
So superb.
Yeah, I think it was match worn, but on the bench it didn't get onto the pitch there, so that was my bit of memorabilia there. But yes, he was
superb.
He was in the squad for the Euros, and he's the last Ipswich player to have been to a major tournament, even with England.
Yeah, and a quick story there as well. He only ever played one more game whilst at Arsenal, and he was the 3rd choice goalkeeper for that game. And I can't remember which way round it was now. I think David Seaman had got injured and replaced at half time by David James, if I remember rightly. David James then got injured, which then gave Richard Wright a second cap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a shame that his career didn't go sort of on from there. And we then have players, obviously not in the book, these are ones for just Ipswich and country, so I don't know if they get mentioned, but like Kieran Dyer, who then makes his England debut in the September 2000, a year after leaving Ipswich. Tyrone Mings, Darren Bent. I know Tyrone Mings wasn't through the youth academy here, but he effectively was. He joined here at like 18, 19 and had a good couple of seasons here. So they're probably the Ipswich England players we've had in the last sort of 25 years. Those 3 there, the main ones who have picked up a good number of caps and played, and sort of with a strong connection to Ipswich, opposed to maybe just a loan spell like an Andros Townsend or a Jake Livermore who were here and then went off to get them. But yeah, it's sort of slim pickings.
Yes, well, the book was released this week. I received them on Monday, Tuesday, and I've obviously been pushing it on social media, and I've already had a few people say to me, what about Mick McNeil? You've forgotten him. You've forgotten Darren Bent. You've forgotten Kieran Dyer. And I thought, I haven't just sort of thrown this together without a bit of research. And you're right. Of course, Bent, well, all 3 of those played for England. I mean, Mick McNeil played in the late 50s whilst a Middlesbrough player, for example. But it is literally just whilst at Ipswich. So if anybody is thinking about why have you not mentioned Bent and Dyer, that is why. Because obviously they played after they left the club. Yeah,
and to be fair, I've done my research, and all the names I've said, I haven't seen a horror moment come over your face when you realise you've missed someone. So I'm sure it's all good on that side.
I worry more about Town on the telly. I'm sure there's a live game there somewhere that is missed. But there was a little collaboration of us who pulled a list together once. So if there is a missed game, I'm not solely to blame.
Yeah, no, don't worry on that one. So just got a couple of questions just to sort of finish up. I've taken up enough of your time already, I'm sure, but I just wondered if you've got any stories or anything about those who came close. Who were the ones that were close? Maybe people called up into a squad that didn't get an appearance, or
it's funny really, because I'm about to do Park Run tomorrow. Hopefully, I've been injured for a while, so I'm sort of 50-50 whether I'm going to do my local Clacton Park Run. And because of it being Remembrance Weekend, we're being encouraged to wear red. And I thought, I don't think I've got anything red. And I've just been up into my wardrobe before doing this. And I found a red England shirt from the era that Titus Bramble played. But I still don't know off the top of my head if Titus played for the under-21s. I'm sure you'd know.
He did, yes, he did.
Yeah. And I put it on, and amazingly, it still fits. But I thought I can't wear it because it's got Bramble number 6 on the back and it's signed. And I thought it's going to get nice and sweaty and then it will have to be washed and will the signature wash out? So
is this a shirt you actually played with, or just one you had printed out?
it's just one I had printed out.
Oh, okay, because I've got another one here. Just to keep my one here. This is a Darren Bent match worn shirt from England.
Crikey.
England under 21 versus Hull versus Germany under 21s in a game that was played at the the KCOM Stadium as it was at Hull, and the game he scored in there with a sort of bent 9 on the back. I made the mistake of wearing this. When England were losing to Slovakia in the Euros, I put it on for the second half for luck, and I spilled some beer on it when Jude Bellingham scored an overhead. And then when I washed it, some of the lettering's come off. So that was a mistake made after I'd already had like 6 beers before I decided to put it on. But it did the trick. England did win the game against Slovakia, so partly down to myself and Darren Bent. That was.
Yeah, well done. So I probably won't wear that shirt tomorrow, but again, you're looking at that era where we had a few under 21 players, but there's Scowcroft as well. And people would say to me, how good are these players? Will any of them actually play for England? And I was convinced Richard Wright would, albeit more than 2 games. Now, there was another couple back in the mid-80s. One was Jason Dezelle, and this is who played for the under 21s again. And my favourite player probably in that era was Mark Brennan, who played for the under 21s. I'm not saying they would have been good enough for the full squad, but again, you talk about slim pickings. In the modern era, going back sort of 25 years, if you can call that modern, there obviously hasn't been anyone because of where Ipswich have been for most of that time. And I guess the closest one that missed out for me would have been Paul Cooper, really.
Yeah, it feels like the general Ipswich answer is Paul Cooper, and then maybe you could add sort of Marcus Stewart or one of the players in that Premier League season. So even like Jamie Clapham had a fantastic season when we were struggling for left-sided options there, and you thought maybe could be one that maybe gets a chance. Like for me, he was a better player than Steve Guppy was, but we'll see.
Definitely,
Jason Zell's a sort of fantastic example there. I'm sure a lot of the people who'll be reading your book have also read Stuart Watson and Jason Zell's book that he's done recently, The Follow the Thunder, his autobiography. And he talks about his England career, and I think he got banned for misbehaving on an under-21s trip, and I think that was sort of held against him as he went into senior football. But it did appear as though, I think when he was having a really good season for Ipswich before his move to Spurs, that he was quite close getting into an England squad at that point, but he never made that jump. But I guess it's those guys from there, and I don't know, it's not a name I've ever heard linked, but someone like Steve McCall, for example, was a mainstay when we were a top team in the early 80s. And
he was a B international, I believe.
Yeah, and a few of those like Mitch DeVray, I think, was a B international. And then we had David Johnson, who managed to sort of play for every single one of the home nations at one time or another, and Jamaica, who's got a fantastic international career. But it does feel like we haven't had anyone close. But now we look at this squad as it is, and who do you think will be the next Ipswich Town player to play for England?
It's got to either be Leif Davis or Liam Delap, and I've been telling close friends, family, the minute this book comes out, I'm surprised it didn't happen yesterday. I said there's one guaranteed way of getting Leif Davis into the England squad and onto the pitch. That's for me to bring out my book, where you consider the last Ipswich player was 20 odd years ago to play for England, and the book will come out, and in that week the next Ipswich player will be called up, and then he'll be playing next week to make the book out of date. I was convinced that would happen.
Yeah, but and like I say, to age myself, I'm sort of 39 and a half, so still clinging on into my 30s. But the only Ipswich players to have played for England in my lifetime is Richard Wright for his one cap, and the sort of tail end of Terry Butcher's Ipswich England career between sort of up to the end of the 86 World Cup, when I'd have been 1, sort of just before the World Cup. So it really is a long time since Ipswich have had an England player, and it's something that does feel close. Like the under-21 squad is a really, really high level now. You've got Mari Hudson and Liam Delap, who've been named in that for this international break, and they are pushing. I think Jacob Greaves is somebody who's going to push, but you just have to hope that one of them can get themselves over the line before they leave the club for whatever reason. Because once they get into the England squad, we're going to struggle to keep hold of anyone, whether we're a Premier League club or not.
Exactly, yeah. Just to give you a quick flavour, I'm a bit older than you, Joe, by 14 years nearly. And I know Ipswich were one of the biggest clubs in the country, in Europe at the time, but in the 82 World Cup, which is what I said earlier about how I go back to that, I used to get Shoot magazine when I was a kid, and the coverage back then for World Cup tournaments, and that was superb in Shoot, and maybe Match, I got that occasionally, and you would just see all the Ipswich players, as you said, the Scotland Ipswich players as well, featured, and it was just so normal. It was just, you buy the magazine, there'd be Ipswich players in their England kit, their Scotland kit, going off to the World Cup, and you didn't think anything of it. And it's a little bit of a inspiration as to why I wrote this book, actually, because 6 years ago, I was really lucky. I went to Paul Mariner's surprise 65th birthday party. There was only 16 of us there, and that included Mariner, Butcher and John Walk and their partners, Mariner's sons. And it was really bizarre how I ended up there. I just got an invite through someone else who was invited, and I was sitting there listening to Mariner and Butcher absolutely rinsing poor old John Walk, because they were talking about the 82 World Cup, and they got into a couple of stories, and they were like, "You'd gone home by this time, Walkie." And then when they got into the 86 World Cup, and Butcher inevitably talks about Diego Maradona, halfway through the story he said, "Oh, by the way, you didn't even get there this time, Walkie." And the bloke just had to sit there and take this real drubbing from Mariner and Butcher. And it was one of those nights where you, I and many other Ipswich fans would have paid 200 quid for a night with Mariner, Butcher, Walk, three of my favourite all-time players. And again, it was just sitting here thinking back in those days, it's just normal. But now, if any Ipswich player played for England now, we'd all be flying high, wouldn't we?
Yeah, it would be. And I guess the obvious question after 4 books in 2 years is, what's next?
A break. I haven't really got anything in the pipeline, although somebody did suggest to me last night, is for Town and Country going to be developed into the Scotland players? But to be honest, there wasn't many. I was trying to think last night, who's the next nation that had quite a few Ipswich players. I think there's about 11 that might have played for Ireland.
Yeah, I guess it would be Ireland. I did actually put all this together once for a Blue Monday advent calendar where we announced it day by day which country we had the most caps.
Oh, okay.
There was exactly 24 at the time, although that would have changed now. There was 24 equal, so we might have had 4 countries with 1 cap, but there was 24 unique numbers of caps per country and players. And I think obviously the ones you'd expect, Ireland, Wales and Scotland, were sort of next on the list. Northern Ireland with sort of a lot of caps with Jimmy Gill and Gareth McCauley at the time. But it does seem Ireland is going to be flying up there with sort of at least 2, it seems. This season we've had
4,
like 4 different players, about 25 caps over for those 4 players as well. So I guess they're the options. Yeah,
but to be honest, the second edition of Town on the Telly is written after each live game. So what you got to bear in mind, the first book covered 171 live games over a 46-year period, something like that. And I figured if it's going to have to be the same number of games and years again, I'll be in my 80s or 90s. So it might not happen. But of course, last year was a record year for live TV games. So if we keep going like that, and obviously now if we ended up back in the Championship next season, there's obviously more live games in the Championship. The thing is with that, it is literally just what I call bona fide live games. So on Sky.
Not the red button.
Not the red button, not Fire Stick. Am I allowed to say that? And anything that's streaming, Town TV, I followed previously. It's not that. It's got to be where, like people talk about Sky Plus now, but yes, there might be 20 Sky Plus channels, but there's only the one Sky Plus live game, isn't there?
There's only one game that's on Sky Sports Football. Yeah,
that's it. So it's what I say bona fide, you know what I mean, but some people would really argue the point. What do you mean by bona fide, and what about Town TV? They're all live. If you put yourself in another country and pay for it,
No, excellent. Okay, and just to finish it, where can people buy your books, which is the big thing for you? Obviously, you want to sell as many copies of this, so as many people can read this. I know.
Okay.
So I was in the town today, so I did pop in. I did find Town on the Telly was in Waterstones, but the other two weren't there, which is frustrating because that was the one I already had.
Yes. So the problem there is I self-published the 2 Game Changers books, and I've learned that the biggest thing about self-publishing is, although you've got more control over number of orders, prices, etc., you can't really, as an individual, get into Waterstones, for example. But this has gone through the same publisher that did Town on the Telly, and I'm pleased to say it will be in Waterstones. They're put in an order. There's actually, if you went onto Waterstones Ipswich website, there's kind of a template there now, although it says not available and no picture, but it's coming in Waterstones. But mostly through me, my website is my column name, which is thefullerflavour.co.uk. And on the or any page on the website, there's a menu bar at the top, and it's got all my books there. So if you click on for Town and Country, it'll take you to that page. There'll be an order form, my bank details, and I am getting orders through quite a lot, but they're being fired out within the same day of receiving the order, so they're going quite quick. They're also on my publisher's website, but I have to admit I can't quite remember the website address. It's JM for Mike D Media Limited. It might be jmdmedialimited.co.uk.
That's right. As long as we know they're on your website, that's the main thing. So so if you just want to give your website another plug, and then
it's www.thefullerflavour.co.uk.
Yeah, and so that's great. So if anyone wants this book, head over there. Carl's obviously very active on social media, pushing as well, and I'm sure if you've got any queries, and if you point them his way, he'll be able to help you out. If not, you can send them our way to the Blue Monday podcast, and we'll be able to get in contact with Karl and go from there. So once again, Karl, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate your time, and the books that are coming. Like I say, all Ipswich fans are getting every bit of content we can at the moment and enjoying reading these, and I'm sure for Town and Country will be another great addition to the spectrum of books about Ipswich Town at the moment.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.